We're talking through the Sermon on the Mount, and last week was one that was kind of something that you might say, hey, it wasn't really super applicable to me, wasn't really super challenging on the levels that you're at, but I hope today you can see how the topic that we're talking about is something that is fully relevant to you right now as you live, where you're seated, here somewhere in this room, which we're pretty spread out tonight, which is kind of fun. But as we do that, go ahead and open to Matthew chapter 5, and as you're turning there, I want you to think about when something happens and you actually get the opposite reaction that you were kind of anticipating. In the stories of Harry Potter, has anybody read the books? I know there's got to be some people who have read the books. Has anybody at least watched the movies? Does anybody at least have an idea of what happens in Harry Potter? There's a bad guy, right? And we're not supposed to say his name, but we're in church and not the movie, so we can say his name. It's Voldemort, right? So you're not supposed to say his name. But what's the whole purpose of the entirety of the movie? Of all of them? What is Voldemort trying to do? Kill Harry, right? So obviously he's not very good at it because there's 7.5 movies or something like that. So he's not very efficient. But there's a whole concept actually entwined in the story that makes it so that by Voldemort killing Harry, what is he actually doing? Who said it? Cohen? What is he actually doing? Killing himself, right? By him killing Harry, the whole objective of everything that's been happening, by him killing Harry, he's actually killing himself because Harry is part of this magical realm and has mystical powers in terms of his life, right? So that's a pretty clear example of he's trying to do something and the exact opposite is taking place, right? Another one is, has anybody ever been in a boat that has a rear motor that you use your hand to move, right? Okay? So if you're in a boat like that and you're trying to drive or boat forward, right? And you want to turn right, which way are you going to push? The opposite, right? And it's actually really, really hard. Or has anybody ever been in a boat that has oars that you're actually paddling? What happens if you paddle on one side for too long? You're just going to go around in a circle, okay, right? What happens if you paddle on the sides in opposite ways at the same time? Yeah, you're going to spin. You're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to spin, right? Okay, so you have to know what you're doing to get where you're going, right? You have to know what you're doing to get where you're going, because sometimes the reaction for what you anticipate is not actually going to be the reaction that you're trying to get from what's going on. And so today we're going to talk about killing people with kindness. And it seems like it's kind of a strange thing to say, right? But perhaps you've heard that phrase, killing people with kindness. Has anybody heard that phrase before? Right? Kill them with kindness? No? Boy, some of you guys are just really tired today. Let's talk real fast about the brotherly elbow of fellowship. The person next to you starts falling asleep. Yeah, just give them a little jab in the ribs. I will say this. Some of you guys know I was in seminary with Pastor Jeff. And our group had that as far as a help for each other to make sure that we were all staying awake, paying attention during long classes. So help your neighbor to be able to focus. Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 48. We jump in the middle of what Jesus is saying, and he says, "You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So tonight we're going to look at two principles for dealing with people that you might naturally be in conflict with. Two principles that are going to be laid out for us so that we understand how God wants us to treat other people that we might have conflict with. And we're going to unpack these different scenarios of conflict that Jesus talks about, and we're going to see how they apply to us today and how we should be living as people who are redeemed kingdom citizens. Because remember, that's what Jesus is talking about here in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. He says, kingdom citizens will look different than other citizens. Here's how you will be marked so that people will know. So the first thing we're going to talk about is surrender your rights. Surrender your rights. We live in the great nation of America, right? And one of the biggest things that we are known for is demanding our rights, right? We have the Bill of Rights. We have the Constitution. We have, I forget how many amendments. It's been a long time since government class. But there's a lot of amendments to that give us basic liberties and freedoms and rights. We have our unalienable rights. We like to use our rights for ourselves. But if we're going to talk about our rights, most of our rights are focused upon what? Ourselves, right? Our rights are focused on us. And the basic premise to take from this is Jesus says, if you are a kingdom citizen, you are going to set aside your rights, you're going to surrender them for the sake of the kingdom and for the sake of the king and his glory. And we're going to see how he explains that here in this passage. So that's something that's going to be probably hard for us to think about, right? Because from a very early age, we learn certain things from our families, from the way in which we live, different things like that. Raise your hand if you have your own room. Raise your hand if you have your own room. It's like 90% of the room here. Hudson, my friend, I always had to share a room. And there were always 2 rooms. And there were 3 brothers. But somehow, I always had to share a room. I was in the middle, so I get like that whole type of thing. But I even tried for a period of time to try to be the worst brother I could to see if I could get the room by myself. And that did not help either. So if that's your strategy and you're in that position, it's not worth it. You don't get what you want in the end, right? But when you have your own room, you kind of get protective over it, right? Don't come into my room. Don't take my clothes. Don't take the things out of my room. Don't do any of those things, right? Right? Maybe. Some of you guys, if you're being honest, yeah, that's how it works, right? Yeah. But is that probably really how we should be living? Because who are probably the most people who are the people that you are in conflict with in that situation? You're pointing right at him. He's sitting right there. Yeah, it's your siblings, right? Because most of the time when your friends come over, do you guys realize you treat your friends different than you treat your siblings? Yeah. When your friends come over and you have your, amazing toys or whatever you guys play with, right? Your video games or, your favorite sweater that you want them to wear. Like, you totally borrow that out to them. You let them wear it. Like your new shoes, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just a guy, and so all we did was play video games and blow stuff up. So we would share those things with our friends, but not with our brothers, right? If they touched it, it was like the end of the world. And so you have these selfish tendencies, or if we're being honest, you have these tendencies that you're willing to do things for people that you love or care for or feel like you will get something from in the end, right? I call it the birthday party principle. You invite people to your birthday party who you would like to be invited to their birthday party, right? So the kid that has the really cool house, or the kid that has, maybe the swimming pool, or the kid that last year rented out, the entirety of Kauffman Stadium to play baseball in. Like, you rent that out, yeah, he's probably going to invite you to his party if you invite him to yours, right? So you do that. You invite it to them because you're hoping to get something out of it because you have selfish motives in that. But the people who you don't get things from, you tend to just say, stay away, right? And so you're probably willing to surrender your rights for people that you feel like you will gain something from, or for people that you really love and truly care for. But Jesus is going to say, hey, it's more than that. And he starts by taking us back to the Old Testament. He takes us back to Leviticus. And in the book of Leviticus, he talks with us about the Old Testament law that talked about the just retribution for things that took place. So if you go back and look through Leviticus, there's a whole litany of different legal things that are written for what happens when somebody does something wrong. And so some of those are that they go back and they show that if you accidentally kill somebody's donkey, you need to pay for that donkey, right? Or if you accidentally kill somebody's rooster, you need to pay for that. Or if you on purpose do it, there's even a more severe punishment for those different things. But in Leviticus 24, 17 through 22, he writes and he talks through there. This is Moses taking the law from God that says, whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Whoever takes an animal's life shall make it good, life for life. But if anyone injures his neighbor, as he has done it to them, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has caused the person shall be given to him. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, and whoever kills a person shall be put to death. You shall have the same rule for the sojourner and for the native, for I am the Lord your God. So everything you do needs to be paid back in like manner, right? If we think back to last week, or actually it was 2 weeks ago, when Jake talked about his friend who broke out the window in the car. So how would you solve that problem? According to what was just maybe said in here, if you're just going to take it straight literally. How would you solve the problem of the broken window? So, yep, he gets to go break one of your windows, right? Is that super productive? No. But in this case, when we're talking about animals and when we're talking about lives and when we're talking about these types of things, if you killed somebody's animal, that's actually a source of income or a source of food or a source of their life, right? So by taking that away, you've taken what they have, and it needs to be in some way made better, right? And if you killed somebody willfully, there needs to be a punishment for that, for which they're saying here is the death penalty. But when we look at this, we need to see here that he's saying that that isn't actually the purpose of what God's just laws were for. Because they're operating under this practice where they're missing the point of what God is talking about. The point was not vengeance, but the point was justice. There's a difference between vengeance and justice. When you talk about vengeance, you're talking about getting revenge or going back at somebody for that. I want to go and I want to give them exactly what they deserve for what they've done. And the problem with that is that you're once again making it a selfish situation instead of looking at how that shows what God's sovereignty is and what God is doing in that situation. Because what God is doing in speaking through Jesus here is he demonstrates that the true heart behind the situation is the extension of grace, which is going to foreshadow Jesus on the cross. Because the kingdom citizen sets aside their rights and instead allows the injustice that has been done to them to be done to them with an opportunity to redeem it through displaying the gospel. And he walks through 4 different situations here where we see how he's willing to give things up. The first thing that they give up is their comfort, right? If somebody slaps you, is that comfortable? I'm going to say no too, but I am going to say too, I see on Instagram, there's this like whole slap league now. Have you guys seen that? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Where it's like, you know, it used to be like UFC, you just fight the other guy or whatever. Like this, you like stand face to face and you like slap the other person. And they get one slap and then the next person gets another slap until somebody like can't stand up anymore or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly how the words work. But is that going to be very comfortable? No. Even if like somebody little slaps you. Like I can't tell you how many times like one of my kids has slapped me and it's really shocked me. Because it's like, it's not that it hurt that much, but it was like, what the heck? Like, where did that come from, right? And so it's not really comfortable. So he talks about setting aside your comforts. He talks about setting aside your possessions. He says, if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, right, that's your overcoat, Let him have your cloak as well, another cloak that you have, okay? So he's taking both of these. Give to them your possessions. He then goes on to say your freedom. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Kind of a weird thing, right? You wouldn't really think about somebody saying like, hey, you have to go with me for 1 mile. But actually what this is referring to is there was a custom and a law that if a Roman soldier asked you to carry their stuff for them, you had to carry them that distance. So you have to carry the Roman soldier's like armor and all of his possessions for that distance, and he could mandate you to do that, and there was a law. So if he asked you to do that for 1 mile, it says, hey, go ahead and do it the second mile. Go ahead and continue doing what this person has asked you to do. And the last one, he says, if anyone asks of you or begs from you, do not refuse that one who would borrow from you. So give freely of your property, your possessions, and those things. And really why this takes place, we'll see at the end as he gets there, but it's foreshadowing this thought that being a kingdom citizen allows you to say that God has the priority over your own rights. God has the priority over anything that you have, and understanding that what is sacrificed for God is used in terms of the gospel and it going forward wherever you're at. Because you're displaying that you're willing to sacrifice your possessions, your comfort, your freedom, your property for his sake, and you're willing to do that to put Jesus on display. Because you don't have to do those things, right? You don't have to do the different things, the 4 things that were in that scenario. In fact, you might have a right to stop at whatever it is. If somebody slaps you in the face, you can slap them back because the whole principle of the eye for the eye, right? They slap you, you slap them. But is that a good way to live with other people? Is that a way that the world probably lives, right? If you sue me, you know what happens when anybody gets sued? What usually happens when somebody gets sued? You go to court, and then there's something that happens after that. They countersue, right? You sue, they countersue, right? You charge them for something, they charge you for something else, right? You just keep going back and forth, and you create all this conflict that's there. And it's not actually very productive, because a lot of times the people sue and countersue, and they just go back and forth and all those other things, and they end up just paying a ton of money to the court system, and they end up in the same place they were, right? Because they're paying all of this money to try to figure those things out. So Jesus is saying, hey, if you're going to think about what's going on here, if you're going to think about the retaliation, the way in which you deal with these people in the conflict, you need to understand that in doing that, what happens is you end up in a spot that you're saying it's all about me. And what Jesus is saying is, for a kingdom citizen, it's not about you. You've set aside your rights, your freedoms, your liberties, and in fact, you've decided to put the gospel on display instead. He moves on to talk there specifically about our enemies. It says, you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Can anybody find a Bible verse that tells me that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy? Go. Start looking. Find me that Bible verse. What do you think? Besides verse 43. Good job, though. Yeah. That was good. It's clever. Find me an actual Bible verse that says that, besides him quoting this here, or in the other 3 occurrences. Yeah, it's not there, right? So this is going back to similar to what I talked about last week, similar to what Jake talked about in the weeks before. The people in that age are kind of creating their own laws to say, hey, you know what? You should love your neighbor, but you don't have to like the people that you don't like, right? He demonstrates that the people have twisted this command of God, and they're actually making it so that they just want to love the people that are their friends. We've already talked about this a little bit, but is it hard to love your friends? It can be, right? It can be challenging sometimes, right? Hard to love your friend who roots for the 49ers, right? Was that hard, Cohen? When you were the only person rooting for... No, it wasn't? You were able to stay strong? Elsa was able to stay strong? Yeah, okay. I don't see Milo, or I'd ask him. Oh, there he is. He's hiding behind Kara. Yeah. But is it hard to do something when everybody else around you is doing the opposite thing? Yeah, unless you're pretty resolved in that, right? But is it hard to love somebody who loves the same things you like? No, it's pretty easy, right? For example, if you decided to go out with your friends tonight after dinner, to dinner after ASM, since you don't have school tomorrow, you decide, you know what, we're going to go to, where are we going? Arby's? Man, that was like not my top 10. But I did eat at Arby's on Wednesday. The sliders are pretty good. I'm not going to lie. What? I haven't had the buffalo chicken, though. Okay. The wrap? Okay. Yeah. I'll have to try that out. But where are the normal people? No. They do have good meats. I get a euro from there usually. Chick-fil-A. It's closed on Sunday, but good try. Yeah. But still, like, you could have wanted to go there all you wanted, and everybody could have said that was the best place. But they're closed, so they ended that opportunity. Just think of how many more people would go there on the Lord's Day for the Lord's chicken, right? Okay, so try two. Where are we going? I was going to say you better not say Cane's right on the back of Chick-fil-A. But Culver's, right? You know, you go get your ice cream, whatever. They got fish. They got all sorts of things, okay? Now, imagine everybody in the group wants to go there besides one person. Okay? And every week, everyone wants to go there besides one person. Do you think that person is going to naturally voice their opinion every week? No. Why do we say no? Why do we say no? What do you think? Putting you on the spot. Why would you say no? You don't know? Why would you say no? They're not going to keep voicing their opinion. Okay, they could get tired of being that way, right? Raining on everybody's parade. I think there's a bigger thing for why they would not do that. There's a bigger reason. What do you think? They're not going to get their way. They probably are resolved to that. What do you think, Wesley? Yeah, they would rather be included than be left out, right? So if you kept voicing that every week and just said that, eventually, do you think people are going to be like, hey, let's just not invite them? Chloe says she does that all the time. No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, right? You know, if somebody's always going to be like that, you're just going to be like, hey, let's go ahead and not do that, right? But Wesley brings up the point. You know what? For most situations, your friends are going to make the decision. I would rather be with my friends than be doing the thing that I want to do most. It's not really worth the difference between like a 5.7 burger and like a 6.8 burger, right? We're not talking about like Five Guys wasn't an option, right? Where you're paying, I think it's like $35 for a value meal there or something now like that. They're saying it's just outrageous. It is outrageous, right? You know, that's like a whole week's worth of pay, right? No, I'm just kidding. But you would rather be in that situation with people, even if it's not your favorite thing to do, because you care about those people and you want to be included. You want to have those friends, right? But let's flip the scenario here, okay? Imagine that everybody else wanted to go somewhere else, and you're the one person who forced them to go to, I don't want to say Arby's because we've already had one vote for that, but Jack in the Box? Ooh, is there even a Jack in the Box out here? Yeah. Where? Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. Is like Jack in the Box is like the bottom of the barrel of fast food for me. Yeah, the only thing that I like about Jack in the Box was they had a really hilarious Jumbaco commercial back in the day where they put their like Jumbo Jack and their taco together. But imagine that. Let's say it's 15 people, right? There's 14 people who wanted to hang out together, and they go to the place the one person wanted to go. How do you think that one person is going to feel there while they're super excited about eating those like 2 for 99-cent tacos, and everybody else is sitting there like gagging, right? Trying to choke down the food, right? It's going to be a little bit different. Would you say that those people are going to be comfortable in that situation? No. But should they be willing to, at least once, step out of their comfort zone, go to Jack in the Box for the one poor kid who is not right in their food choices, right? Yeah, you just have to do that, right? Or the one person who thinks that like Sonic is better than Dairy Queen, right? It's not. You just have to understand those situations. Look back at the text. It says, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Jesus reminds them that even their enemies are their neighbors. Right now, you guys probably don't understand a lot of the joys of home ownership, but eventually you will probably have at least an apartment or something for which you will have a neighbor around you that will just literally be the worst, right? And maybe it's like they just leave their trash outside of the apartment door and it just smells, or they're always like running above you, like if you're on the bottom floor, or your neighbor who doesn't like mow their grass or other things like that, or parks in like your driveway or like blocks your driveway or all these other things, right? They're just little things, but they're annoying, right? Because you're like, hey, buddy, like you've got a driveway, like you should park in your driveway. Or if they're blasting music all the time, different things like that. You get to these people that they're your neighbor and you know you're supposed to love them, but they're probably not honestly your enemy, right? The people around you are probably really not your enemy because you're probably honestly not around them that much to really hate them that much. So if we're talking about somebody that is your enemy, like that's like your complete opposition. If you try to do something, they're doing everything they can to stop you from doing that. Now that I say that, there could be somebody was talking about HOAs earlier. There could be something with that as far as like an enemy or like a nemesis or something in your neighborhood. But for the most part, most people are not there. Naturally, though, you could have some people in your classes that might be your enemy. You're around them enough to get to the point where you actually start to harbor feelings of bitterness, feelings of anger or hatred, feelings that you don't want the best for that person. But Jesus says, not only are you supposed to love that person, but you're supposed to pray for them. And we're not talking about like imprecatory prayers that you're praying for just punishment for them. We're talking about praying on behalf of them, bringing them before God, asking God to provide for them and to put them into the best situations for them. Because what's happening here is Jesus is saying both of these things. If you choose not to love your enemies, if you choose not to set aside your rights, you are not a kingdom citizen. In fact, you're just like everybody else. Which the hard thing for that is the culture is telling you that you should be just like everybody else, right? Everything around you says, dress like everybody else, talk like everybody else, do the same things that everybody else does so you can blend in, so you can have friends, so you can do whatever you want to do and nobody will speak ill of that. But Jesus here says it's not about being like everybody else. In fact, it's about being like one person, and that person is Jesus. Because he's calling you to set aside your rights and to love others for a specific purpose. One of the commentators that I read as I was preparing this, he wrote this: "The true test of genuine Christianity is how believers treat those whom they are naturally inclined to hate or who mistreat or persecute them." So a true test of if you are a believer is how you treat the people who treat you poorly, the people who treat you ill or work against you or even persecute you, because that displays your true heart towards people who are made in God's image. He gives us two big reasons why we're supposed to love our enemies here. The first one is God calls us to do it as his children. If you are a child of God, you will love your enemies. You will love the people around you because God calls you to do that. And because first and foremost, God himself loves all people. Do you guys realize that? That God loves all people? I think sometimes it's hard for us to understand that because we understand that there's all these like evil people. We understand that there's all these false religions. We understand that there's all these people that are doing everything they can to work against God. But do you realize that God still loves and tries to pursue those people? But because of the hardness of their hearts, they will never respond to who he is. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't love them as somebody who is made in made in his image, and he doesn't love them any less than he loves us. because he loves all people. And his love is not dependent upon the good or the bad that they do, but he loves and pursues them. But that doesn't mean that he's not just and that he's not going to punish sin. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't love them. If you look at Hebrews, we walk through the book of Hebrews, it talks about how God disciplines the ones that he loves. He uses the consequences and the punishments in their lives to try to bring them back to a point where they will understand and respond to who he is. But I think the best display of God displaying how we are to love our enemies is displayed in how God loved his enemies. Let's look at Romans chapter 5. Go ahead and turn there. Romans 5, 8 through 10. It talks here about how God treated his enemies. It says, "But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life." When we think about this, it's saying that we were God's enemies, and he chose to die for us. That's the epitome of self-sacrifice, right? It's the furthest example of sacrificing on behalf of someone else, is to literally die for them, right? And it's something that's probably beyond what we can even understand would take place, because none of us have done that for anyone else. But when we think about what he's displaying is, if God was willing to send Jesus to die for you while you were literally his enemy, what should you, as the person who is trying to imitate Jesus, be willing to do on behalf of others to put the gospel on display? Because when you do that, the Bible talks in Romans, if you skip forward a couple of chapters, it says, when you do good to those who do evil to you, it says you literally heap up burning coals on your head. Does that sound pretty comfortable? Has anybody ever touched burning coals? Why? Has anybody ever tried to walk across burning coals? Like Michael Scott? Right? No? Anything? No? Is it comfortable? No. So if you're saying are they actually saying you're heaping up literal burning coals on their head? No. But if you could imagine being kind to somebody, and as you're being kind to somebody who is against you, it feels like you're heaping up burning coals on their head. You know what that really is saying? You're getting that person to a point where they're going to say, okay, I can't stand it anymore. Why are you being nice to me when I'm being not nice to you? Why are you doing this? They're going to ask questions. They're going to see that you're different. They're going to see that you're not willing to fall to the pressures, right? I was watching a video this week, and there was this guy on there, and they were afraid that this guy was going to beat him up, and he goes, I just play dead. That's what I do every time. I just play dead. It's no fun to beat up something that's dead. So the kid is like, yeah, okay, let's just do that. So the mean guy is coming up in the video or whatever, and then just both the guys just flop onto the ground, right? And it's like, okay, is it fun for that guy anymore? No, right? He's not doing that. But is that actually killing him with kindness? Is that heaping up burning coals on his head? No. Because you know what? Everybody's going to try to avoid the pain. Everybody's going to try to do this. And I'm not saying, hey, go to school tomorrow and let the bullies beat you up, right? But what I am saying is, when they do, or if they do, hopefully it's if they do, not when they do. Hopefully everybody doesn't have a bully waiting for them. Or when it's verbal, or when somebody's not kind to you, take a moment to see how you can redeem that situation. How you can instead choose to display Christ to them. Because you know what's really easy is when somebody wrongs you, to hold a grudge. To keep that. To hold that lack of forgiveness and to keep that against you. And I know that there are probably people in this room who have had people who have sinned significantly and repetitively over and over against you. But the gospel calls us to forgive that person, and more than that, to love that person. To not hold a grudge, to not have anything be in conflict with that relationship, but instead to continuously display to them that this is what the gospel calls me to do. Because then you see the gospel is put on display. Perhaps you've seen that there have been many of these cases now where there are people who are in a murder trial, and what happens is the family goes forward and asks for the judge not to put that person in prison or not to put that person to death for what they've done. And that's something that's crazy, right? If somebody in your family was killed by somebody else, I think most of us naturally, the natural man would say this person needs justice, right? This person needs justice for what they've done, okay? And I also would also say that, sometimes the best thing to do is probably to not allow that person to be around other people so they can't do that again. And you'd have to think about that. Seriously think about what took place and what happened. But even if we can't say, hey, don't punish them for that, we would have to still forgive them. Because if we withhold forgiveness from them, what we're saying is God has died for a sin that we're not willing to forgive somebody else of. And then we're saying, I'm going to harbor bitterness and anger and other things in my heart. They're going to keep this person from being the one that receives the grace of God through forgiveness. And that is saying, you know what? We're setting ourselves up against God. And I think if you're honest, you wouldn't want to say, I want to be in direct conflict with God on something that he says. But have we thought about our lives that much? Probably the biggest place that you guys have natural enemies is in your home. The hardest people for you to love are probably, honestly, your siblings and your parents. Do you know why that's the hardest people for you to love? Because they're the people who have wronged you more often than not. The people who have taken or broken things that are yours. The people who have kept you from perceived opportunities for you to receive what you think you deserve or you should have. Right? The people who every time you want to go to Arby's, pick Jack in the Box. One more story. They're not both good. They're so bad. Last story about me today. I have two brothers, right? I'm in the middle. They decided that they would take turns voting every time we got to vote, and they would vote for the same place, and then they would swap so that I would never get to go where I wanted to go. Can you believe how petty that is? But also how brilliant that is? Like they've just decided, you know what? Parents are going to ask us, where do we want to go? If two of us outvote the other one, we win every time. So they would just be like, yeah, we're going to Mr. Gaddy's or whatever, like that was a pizza place. I'd be like, why do I never get to go where I want to go? Because I only had one vote. We live in a democracy, right? Same thing, actually, honestly, whenever something broke or something at the house. They would say, if our stories are the same, it's 2-on-1. It looks like you're lying. And most of the time, it was my fault. But for the times that it wasn't, because their story was the same, it was 2-on-1, right? So, had a little bit of bitterness there, right? That they wouldn't include me, that they wouldn't allow that we wouldn't rotate through my favorite things sometimes, right? And then also, when I was in high school, I had a very poor relationship with my dad because my dad was the person who was the seat of discipline in my home. And so that meant whatever I did, I was accountable to him for whatever the punishment was. I was grounded to my room for like a week during the summer. I could only get up, and I had to request the ability to go to the bathroom and do things like that for a week. Like there were all sorts of things, and I deserved everything, probably worse than what they gave me. But because he was the seat of discipline, naturally there's going to be anger, hatred, bitterness. I wouldn't look forward to seeing my dad because usually if we were having a conversation, something was wrong. And we had to, and he tried to grow our relationship back. And some of the ways that he chose to do that were not the ways that I appreciated. Saturday mornings, we would have breakfast at McDonald's at 6 a.m. The same breakfast they serve at 6 a.m. when they open the McDonald's doors, same breakfast they serve at 10:30. I think I told them that for like 10 straight weeks. They still serve the same Egg McMuffin at 10:30. But his way of bringing discipline into my life, of making it so that I would understand what was going on, consequences for my actions, was 6 a.m. We were at McDonald's every Saturday morning. For like 3 years, it felt like. Might not have been that long, but it was pretty close. So would I naturally love and want what's best for him? No. So when he asked me to do my chores, when he asked me to do things around the house, natural things that I was expected to do as a person who lived in the home, would I naturally want to do them? No. Would I want to do just the bare minimum so he would stop asking? Yes. If you're honest, there's probably a lot of you in this room who naturally try to do the bare minimum of what your parents are asking you to do. Naturally tried to do the bare minimum cleaning your room. Naturally tried to do the bare minimum of whatever your chores are. And it's because it's not that they're your enemy, but it's inconvenient, right? You have something else that you'd rather be doing. But your home right now, and your school right now, and if you're working right now, is the place that God is wanting you to cultivate spiritual habits of working through discipline, of working through diligence, of understanding how you are given an opportunity to choose to obey for the sake of the gospel. It starts with you, and it starts with you in your home, you in your schools, and you anywhere God has you right now. And the person that you choose to be today will continue to be the person that you will be as you move forward. And so I hope that you guys walk through this tonight and really honestly, be authentic and genuine in your conversations in small groups. They're going to be smaller small groups tonight than what are usual. So hopefully you have opportunity to share a little bit more of what's going on. But, be honest. I'm going to ask you guys, and I'll get there, in our hands question, I'm going to ask you to get real personal, and I want everybody to do that, to actually share the names that we're going to talk about. So head question tonight is how might our emotions cloud our decision making? Do you feel like it's easy to make good decisions when you're upset with somebody? So imagine the slap in the face we talked about. Somebody slaps you in the face. Is your next response usually, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Talk about that. Heart question. What is our natural response to people getting mad at us display about us? How would living counterculturally display to a lost world that God calls us to a higher standard? How is that the evangelistic focus of what he's talking about here? And the hands question tonight is think about one or two people that are often in conflict with you. Share their names with the group so that you can pray that you would show them the love of Christ instead of sinful responses when conflict arises. And I would say this too on that one too. We'll just use somebody as an example, right? I called Chloe out, right, earlier. If I'm in a small group tonight and I say, you know what, could you guys pray for me? Chloe and I just fight all the time. You know what probably the not nicest thing to do after that small group is? Hey, Chloe, did you know that Lee hates you? We giggle, but honestly, that could be shared. It could be somebody in this room, right? It could be a brother or sister that somebody else is in here, or I don't think you guys have nemesises yet. I don't think you're old enough for that, but they will come. The point of sharing is not so that somebody else would tell somebody else that there's conflict there, but the point of sharing is for the opportunity for reconciliation. It's for the opportunity of the group asking you questions about, hey, how are you doing with your siblings or your parent or whoever it is that you share, your neighbor, a coworker. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's a coach that never lets you play and you think that he's got it out for you or she's got it out for you. How is it that you can display love to that person? How is it that you can display the gospel so that you're showing that you desire more than anything to display that you're a kingdom citizen rather than to maintain your rights and to hate people that you might have all just reasons to hate. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we will split up into our groups. God, we just do thank you for tonight. Thank you for your word. We just pray that as we've received it, as we talk through it tonight, that you would allow us to apply it, that you would just take away anything that would distract from what you're trying to do in our students' hearts. And as you're trying to grow and strengthen them, as you're trying to sanctify them in your word and in your truth, we pray that would be done tonight during these small group times. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.